Welcome and thanks everyone for joining the 2021 webinar series designed and assisted to help you understand the electrical safety and to mitigate all the risk associated with it. So why do we do this? Primarily education. We don't die from what we know, we die from what we don't know. And this is our motto here at QuickSafety, and it's relevant for the electrical industry, but more importantly, for anyone undertaking electrical work. This affects everyone from homeowners all the way to oil and gas infrastructure. Everyone has a part to play, and more importantly, has a responsibility. Today's topic deals with electrical safety and obligations. And for this, we have special insight from Jeff Osborne from Independent Electrical Advisors. Now, this is one subject that everyone needs to be talking about. It has to be one of our biggest misunderstood topics in the world today. My name's Kurt Alexander, founder and CEO of QuickSafety. Now, I've been around the electrical industry for over 40 years, 32 of those years here in Australia. And what we're passionate about is the assistance and education to everyone around electrical safety and compliance. We want to make sure that your asset is safe, your people are safe, as well as having no doubt that you're complying to federal as well as state requirements for electrical compliance. In our experience, everyone leaves this up to the electrician. Huge mistake. When something goes wrong, how are you going to prove what electrician did that work? Also, how do you know that their work actually met the federal and state standards in the first place? Currently, there is no transparency at all. QuickSafety changes that with fully certified standards products and fully approved by each state electrical regulator. You can rest assured your electricians are doing what needs to be done and your asset is safe. We provide complete predictive and preventative measures as well for power faults and failures, electrocutions, and electrical fires. Now, hey, can I get you to type in where you're actually located at now? This is kind of an interesting thing for us to analyze here at QuickSafety. It's very interesting to see where everybody's viewing this from. Our Zurich webinar at the first of this year was attended from 8 countries, and our thermography webinar, the last recent one, was attended by 10 different countries. So we're keen to see where people are attending from today. So just pop that in the chat and we'll take a note of that. We recently conducted a 7-day poll on LinkedIn, and this is the first poll that I've done on LinkedIn. It was quite interesting. It was a simple question. The question was, I understand the federal and state electrical compliance requirements for our building, whether it be residential, rental, industrial, commercial, or for my company's requirements. So it's a very simple question. And here are the results. So 50%, half of the people said they didn't understand at all what the requirements were, which is exactly why we're doing this webinar today and what we do at QuickSafety. And the amazing thing is that 21% said that it was the electrician's job. They just handballed it onto the electrician, which is totally wrong as well. So that's exactly why we do webinars like we do here at QuickSafety. Okay, let's get on with it. After our initial introduction of Jeff, who will be presenting today, we'll dive straight into the presentation. Now we have Mervyn from our QuickSafety as a moderator, and he'll be assisting everyone through the chat function. So please ask questions. This is what it's all about. It's an interactive thing for you to make sure if Jeff touches a subject that you don't know about or you want more information, please just pop it in the Q&A function. It's at the bottom of your screen there on Zoom. If you can't find the Q&A section, just pop it into the chat function. But if you do that, make sure you select all panelists and attendees. Okay? And we'll have ample time at the end to answer all the questions, even if we have to run over time. So ask away. Your question will be answered. Now, today, we're going to address how you understand the condition of your electrical installation. ensuring it's installed and maintained correctly, what your obligations are, maintaining your records, the training of your staff. So the presentation today will be available after the webinar today. We'll make this presentation available. So feel free to tag, share, and comment and share this information around. We need this information to get out. And at the end, we'll give you a link to a short quiz to see if your building is compliant, but also a very interesting sneak peek into our next webinar topic. So stay listening because it's super exciting who we have coming up on our next webinar. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce a great guy who has a ton of electrical knowledge around inspections and testing, and that is Jeff Osborne. So Jeff is our presenter today, and he's the owner of Independent Electrical Advisors. Now, there are so many qualifications that we won't address each individual one, but to say the least, it's a very impressive resume, that's for sure. And hey, Jeff, I see that you started your actual your electrical industry career back in 1980, and that's exactly the same year that I started my career. So it's kind of an oddity that two people doing the same webinar would start their careers at the same time. And you've just about worked in every kind of industry, from domestic to construction and facility management, also as a senior inspector for the ESO. Now, the ESO is the Electrical Safety Office, and that's our Queensland State Electrical Regulator. And you've also do work with RTOs for auditing, training, and assessment and qualifications. Gee, tell you what, a very, very busy guy, very busy. So welcome, Jeff. Can you tell us just a bit more about what you do and why you actually do what you do?
No worries. Thanks, Kurt. It's a pleasure to be here today and fantastic opportunity to be involved in what you do with QuickSafety. Yes, as you stated, I started work 1980. I think when I finished school in the end of 1980, I think I had a day off and then went straight to work. I've pretty much been employed ever since. Did my apprenticeship, got my qualification as an electrician, travelled around a bit. Certainly taken me on a very interesting journey in the electrical industry, from construction projects, maintenance, all sorts of different varieties there, dealing with everything from high-rise buildings, power reticulation and generation systems, all that sort of stuff. Yes, so it's been quite interesting. Currently, I do hold my own contractor's license. I'm the QTP, the qualified technical person on that, as well as the QVP, the business person. Training and assessing qualifications. So we've just done all the upgrades on that in the recent years to make sure we're up to speed there. Through several different agreements that we've got in place with RTOs, we can provide different training, and we can also do in-house training as far as awareness, site-specific training, that sort of thing. Whatever basically needs to be done to ensure that our staff are up to speed, or your staff are up to speed with what your facilities require. I have spent some time in the Electrical Safety Office, as you mentioned, which is our Queensland regulator. Very interesting work in there, fine-tuned some of my skills. But then I saw an opportunity to come out back into the private industry and provide some assistance and guidance for not only electrical contractors, but general industry and the public on trying to improve the statistics and the condition of electrical installations. Part of my previous qualifications, I did hold qualifications as a hazardous area auditor in Queensland. Because of the workload in different areas, I had to let that lapse, and it's proven difficult to get back again. What else we got? The AMSA accreditation for commercial vessels, so we can certify and inspect any electrical systems on commercial vessels, from the small domestic vessels, landing craft, 6-metre vessels and that sort of thing, up to the bigger ships and everything. So yeah, quite an interesting field that we've got involved with now.
Yeah, that's to say the least. That's to say the least. No, that's great. And I'm so glad that people come out of the industry, such as yourself, that have you know, decades and decades of experience, and you see and feel the need to then make sure that everyone is aware. As we saw during that poll, I mean, you got 71% of the people who have no idea about electrical regulations and compliance. And this is where I feel we're headed down this slippery slope into a major disaster. We have all these little minute things that happen every year, you know, nearly every month across the country, that is due because of the lack of this knowledge. But companies like yourself that come out and assist people in doing this, and it's easier once you have a professional come in and look at your business structure. It's easier to keep that going rather than trying to gather all that information yourself, make sure you dot all the I's, cross all the T's, and then roll that out. So very appreciative of what you do, and so glad to have you with us today, Jeff. It's going to be a fantastic webinar. So I'm going to sit back in the background now, and I'm just going to hand it over to you. So I'll let you go on with it.
Righto, thanks, mate. So electrical safety obligations, as Kurt mentioned, a lot of people don't understand what obligations are. Quite happy to leave it to the electrical people. And quite often, by the time you do understand the obligations, it's as a result of something going wrong. And therefore, it's too late to do anything about what's gone wrong or the possible consequences. So hopefully we can clarify some of that today. So what we look at on your screen now, you can see each state has their own electrical safety regulators, their own legislation. In Queensland, which most of the reference I'll be making to today will be the Electrical Safety Act and the electrical safety regulations. You can see the different regulators in each state and territory of Australia. Off to the side, we see New Zealand has something very similar there as well.
And I think that's an important process for, you know, business owners to understand, even if they have multiple businesses across the different states. I mean, hey, we live in a Commonwealth system, but the purpose is still the same. So regardless of the regulation, the purpose is for ensuring safety and saving lives. So it may be put out by a different regulator, but it's still based against the same Australian standards.
Absolutely. It's essentially worded different, but effectively it's all trying to achieve the same thing. So yes, it does get more complicated with interstate operations, of course. So what we're looking at now, the Electrical Safety Act 2002, this is what was introduced into Queensland back in September 2002. The regulations were reviewed and updated in 2013. And the main intention of those acts and regulations was to reduce the number of people dying directly or indirectly as a result of electricity. And a lot of these changes were pushed by an action group of victims of electrical incidences back at the time. So the Act introduces obligations, or in the review, it's now been referred to as duties, onto different people, not only just the electrical workers. We'll get into that in a bit more detail shortly. We need to keep in mind that some of those people might have obligations or multiple obligations for the electrical safety compliance. An example of that, if we look at an electrician, he might take on the obligation of the designer of electrical installation if he's going to add another power point or another piece of equipment to an installation, as well as his obligations as the installer. And like I mentioned, the other states around Australia have been developing, they've been reviewing their electrical safety legislation. At the time when ours was introduced in Queensland, a lot of the other states sort of took that on board and used some of our information as review topics, and they've brought theirs into line pretty much along the same lines as ours. I know some of the other states have gone a bit further to address some of their localised issues as well. So like we've been saying, the intention of the electrical safety legislation to ensure that people are not put at risk of injury directly or indirectly by electricity. So directly, naturally, we know electricity is not a nice thing if we touch it. It does tend to cause us all sorts of health issues. But indirectly, maybe we get a shock while we're standing on a ladder trying to fix a light. We might not be hurt by the electricity, but we fall off that ladder. We could have an indirect injury that way. So not only directly by the electricity, but by the effects of the electricity could be causing injuries. And to ensure property is not put at risk of damage, again, directly or indirectly by the fire, by electricity, the likes of causing fires and other sorts of damage like that. Another point there, to ensure that organisations are not putting their workers at risk of injury while they're undertaking electrical work. It's very specific in the regulations now about the restrictions or the prohibitions on doing live electrical work. I can remember back in my earlier times, there was an expectation that electricians knew what they were doing with electricity. It was fine for them to work live because they knew what the consequences and how to deal with it. Certainly a lot of people, alive and dead, that have found out the wrong way that the working live is not a good option. So there's prohibitions in place now to stop that. And another point there, to ensure that electrical equipment is designed, manufactured, and more importantly, for an asset point of view, it's maintained to be electrically safe. So that's the main intention of our safety legislations nowadays. So that brings us to, how does the Electrical Safety Act and how do the electrical safety regulations affect your business? That can be in multiple ways. So the obligations for our electrical safety do not rest entirely with electrical workers, or if we employ an electrical contractor, it's not entirely up to them to ensure that the place is safe. Right. By that we mean, yes, we expect the electrician to know and understand how to do his work properly, maintain or do his maintenance work, so it's going to be electrically safe and it functions correctly. There's a limitation on what electrical workers or electrical contractors can do when they do find something that's not as it should be, whether it be an installation problem or some failing equipment. And that needs to be put back onto the person conducting the business. So there's obligations on the person conducting the business or the undertaking. They have an obligation to ensure, or a duty to ensure, that their electrical installation or the electrical installation they have control over in their business premises is maintained and kept electrically safe. So that, going down those paths, making sure that if something is identified to them that's unsafe, they can rectify that or give the order to have that rectified in a timely manner and not put people at risk.
And that's probably one of the things, Jeff, that I find is probably the most widely misunderstood is the whole thing around the PCBU. I mean, everybody generally thinks, well, the electrician's responsible, the electricians, they're the ones that are qualified to do this work. But the PCBU ruling change in February 2019 was very clear and adamant about that the PCBU wears that risk of compliance and safety. And is that what you found in your experience, is that, that there seems to be that missing link of people knowing what they're supposed to be doing and that they are liable?
Absolutely. And I quite regularly have discussions with contractors, mainly locally, but throughout Queensland, where they've identified something in an installation that may not be exactly the way it should be, for whatever reason. They'll bring that to the attention of the person in control of the business or the premises, and quite often they'll say, no, it's been like that for a long time, it'll be fine, don't worry about it. So that goes back onto that person. Once that contractor or the electrical worker has highlighted that to that PCBU, it's their responsibility to ensure that it is fixed. So, these sort of things. Another concern is that, electricians don't have the authority to just disconnect the power if they believe something's unsafe. And that can lead to a whole lot of legal issues if they do disconnect something that they believe to be unsafe, thinking they're doing the right thing. It could cause some other hazards. And all sorts of other issues can come up from that. So it is a bit of a minefield, but it's pretty straightforward on what we need to do. And moving on from there, each person has a duty to ensure their own electrical safety as well as that of persons around them. So pretty straightforward there. If we're non-skilled people, we should hopefully, and I know you're not allowed to use the term common sense anymore, but we should understand the fact that if we see a switchboard open, we shouldn't be sticking our fingers in there. And we shouldn't be suggesting to anyone around us to do that. If we see a faulty appliance, it should be taken out of service, removed, the danger removed, turned off, isolated, anything like that. So we all have an obligation. Back into the workplace scenario, we've got an obligation there to make sure we're not putting ourselves or anyone else at that work site at risk of electricity in that workplace. Another point there, the way the electrical work is carried out and completed is covered by an obligation under the Act, regardless of work being done by an electrical contractor or an employee of the company. So when the electrical work comes into it, it doesn't matter whether they're a direct employee of the company or we're using a contractor. There's ways that it's got to be done safe. The person in control of that electrical installation must ensure that we can get clear access to the work that needs to be done. You know, that the equipment is all there, it's all safe to be used, it's all in good working order, and all those sort of things come into it as well. So again, it pushes that obligation not only on the worker, but back onto that PCBU. So how can we ensure the electrical safety in our installations? Multiple ways, or different things we can do there. We can discharge our obligations in several ways. First one, and the easiest thing to do, is possibly understanding what our obligations are and what we need to do to discharge them. Understanding what needs to be done to ensure we're meeting our obligations. So as always, the educational side of it, we need to understand what our obligations are. If we're in control of an electrical installation, if we've got electrical workers on staff, all that sort of thing, we need to make sure we understand it and what we need to do. So some of those things, undertaking regular testing and inspection, having a schedule, and importantly, if we've got an inspection and testing schedule there, we need to be sticking to it. Many times I've seen fantastic ideas put in place. We're going to do this, we're going to do these inspections, we're going to carry out regular testing and all this sort of thing. For whatever reason, the money's not available or the time's not available to do it. We all get busy. The bean counters take over the world, and all of a sudden we don't have the time or the money allocated to do those sort of things, and it all falls by the wayside. Before we know it, we're getting failures, we're getting problems, and we're back to square one again. Hopefully it doesn't cause any significant damage or injuries, and we can get back on track and keep things going again. Just very common that falls apart.
Yeah, just on that point, Jeff, I think a lot of people have a hard time understanding the difference between what a regular testing is and what an inspection is. So could you just clarify that for everybody at the moment?
Yeah, I think we get into it in a bit more detail in a few slides, but just as a basic sort of thing, you know, our inspections, we can be just doing regular visual inspections through workplaces. I've got some examples coming up at the end of the presentation there. Some pretty basic sort of stuff that's evident even for non-technical people to pick up that something doesn't quite look right. And that can be something that's simply done by a supervisor, a safety officer, someone that's just allocated that job in the organisation. They can go around. Are the covers on everything? You know, are the switchboard doors closed? Is everything out of the way? Is something being hit by the forklift when it runs around? Do we have leads laying across walkways, getting damaged, loose cables, all those sort of things? And then the testing goes into more detail to ensure that everything's still right technically with the installation. You know, making sure that wires haven't corroded, they're starting to fail, all that sort of thing comes into it.
And that's where I find that it depends on what classification your building falls to in 3019, but that's AEST 3019 for everybody, is the fact that, you know, even mandatory RCD testing and the schedule of testing for it. So when I look at what I would say regular testing is the cyclic testing that property has set out from their own experience, like you said, and they may say, okay, we want to check our cables, we want to do visual inspections, and then have a systematic thing for that, which is highly valuable, but then also meeting the regulatory obligations of 3019 to where they say, yes, okay, we have to test our RCDs, and this is the schedule. And more importantly, what you said before is, if you have a schedule, stick to it. It's there for a reason, you know, regardless of the money or the not money or the time or the no time, stick to that. We
had on the testing and tagging, just getting off track a bit, some time ago, I helped one of the government facilities locally in the area. We reviewed their testing and tagging. It was costing an absolute fortune to get their regular testing and tagging done. When we looked into it, the company that was providing that service was getting paid per tag. And there was a lot of equipment in that system that was being tested and tagged that didn't necessarily need to be tested. So we managed to make a few changes, and some of that equipment was no longer tested and tagged because it didn't fall into the category that needed to be done that regularly, and saved quite a substantial amount of money. So it was good, one aspect, that they were getting test and tagging done, and it was done regularly. But from a financial side of things, they were throwing a lot more money into the project than they really had to, for not really achieving any result. But we'll have a look at that a bit later when we talk about a bit more detail in there. The second dot point there, and this is the important thing, making sure our records for all of our electrical equipment, installations and periodic inspections and testings are kept up to date and they are complete and accurate. I quite often tell contractors there's no point carrying out testing if we're not going to record the results. Now, typically, everyone's got the paperwork to do the results. That paperwork more than likely ends up on the floor of the work truck. It ends up as a serviette when someone spilt the pie at smoko time, and very often there's no test results come back. Then becomes very hard to prove from an electrical worker point of view, very hard to prove that we've actually done the work properly and we've left the job electrically safe before we've moved on to the next job. So we need to make sure we've got some system in place to capture all that. When we look at that, how can we ensure our electrical installation is compliant? So we know it's got to be compliant. So this gets a bit more into the technical side of things. All electrical work must comply with the requirements of AEST 3000. So as a rough rule of thumb, AEST 3000 is updated about every 10 years. Our current version is the 2018 version. And that's basically the standard that all our electrical installations must comply with. The main intention of that standard is to prevent persons getting shocks from electricity and prevent electricity causing fires. So pretty straightforward, but it's amazing how many misinterpretations or misunderstandings there are of what the requirements in AEST 3000 are. Of course, there's a whole lot of other standards that AEST 3000 refers to, which then does muddy the waters even further for specific installations, hazardous areas, high voltage, caravan parks, marinas, medical facilities, all those sort of things come into it as well. AEST 3000 is also listed in the electrical safety legislation that an electrical worker must comply with the requirements of AEST 3000. So it is a legislative requirement. So there is potential, if we're not compliant with it, depending on the scale of what we've done wrong, potential action by the regulator that they can take. Could go all the way up from a simple on-the-spot fine through to cancellation of electrical licences. And there have been situations where people have lost their electrical licence. They can no longer work in the electrical industry because non-compliance with the electrical requirements of AEST 3000. The other point there, electrical work is only undertaken by persons with a current work licence for the type of work they will be undertaking. We need to be licensed. If we're working on any voltage over 50 volts AC, we need to have an electrical work licence. Pretty straightforward. We need to be trained to get that licence, and we need to maintain our training to maintain that licence. They do expire. There have been several cases that I'm aware of where people have been working with expired licences. Technically, from the day after that expiry, you're working unlicensed if you keep working. So it's something we need, as electrical workers, we need to be on top of. We need to make sure our electrical worker is competent to carry out the type of work and the required testing of their work, regardless of the worker being an employee of your business or whether they're employed by a contractor. Right? If we look at the whole scope of the electrical industry, one license covers all that work, whether we're working on control systems, PLCs, whether we're working on domestic installations, commercial installations, building switchboards, through to high voltage reticulations, complex automation systems. One license covers all of that. So we need to make sure that whatever the type of work we want that electrician to do, they are competent to do it. There might be additional training they need to do to make sure that we're up to speed with that. Again, an auditing process we should have in place. And I'm sure this doesn't happen too often, but does someone from the company go around and inspect the work that they've had an electrician do, their own electrician, or a contractor comes in and does the work? On a bigger project, we might have someone come in and check for quality assurance purposes and meeting the specification, but they're just the general stuff. Has it been done properly? Is it working? You know, is everything done the way it should be? So both our regular inspections and auditing should be carried out. Again, we need to make sure that we've got some way of capturing that information as well. So moving on to our electrical work. And again, getting back to our PCBU, if we employ an electrical worker, doesn't mean the obligations fall back onto that poor old electrical worker. Right? The PCBU, the person that's conducting the business that that electrical worker is employed by, has the obligation to make sure that they're providing all the required equipment and procedures for that electrical worker to work safely. The electrical worker needs to understand their obligations. I've certainly seen in many of the years that I've been around, my co-workers, some of my co-workers, I won't say all, but some of my co-workers certainly didn't have an attitude towards electrical work or electrical safety as I do. And some of their work left me dumbfounded at times. I'll leave it at that. The electrical worker needs to ensure their work is compliant with the wiring rules and any other standards that apply to the work location, if it's hazardous areas or high voltage or anything like that. Again, we need to make sure we're on top of that and they do have an understanding. The worker must have the necessary safety and test equipment to do the work. It's up to the PCBU, the person conducting that business, the operator of that business, to ensure that they've got all that equipment. They've got to provide one way or another the safe procedures, the necessary safety equipment, and the test equipment they're going to work. Like I said, the safe system of work there we need to have, as far as how we expect that electrical worker to do the work safely. If we're employing contractors, same sort of thing, but we need to make sure that they do have those systems. These three photos are interesting photos. These aren't staged. These are all photos that I've collected over a period of time. This is, to the best of my knowledge, all work that's been done by electrical contractors. So the one on the left there to start with, we can see just in that area there, a nice little light switch. Directly below that is the bathtub. So when we look at AS 3000, it's not compliant with some of our requirements in AS 3000 as far as keeping electrical switches away from the wet areas of bathtubs. I don't suggest anyone try it, but you could sit in that bath, reach up and turn the light switch on. Probably not the ideal situation. The middle photo there, it is in a bathroom in a motel that was, I believe, not long renovated, and we've got a light half in and half out of the shower area. A very low IP rating, so it's not something that would be typically allowed to be outside, let alone in where we're going to be splashing water around in the shower. And then also in that zone, there's a curtain there. The power point is nice and close. Keeping in mind that this is in an installation that was recently, I'm led to believe, recently renovated, and these fittings have still remained in there. Our last photo on the right-hand side there is during construction of a swimming pool. A nice tin fence right alongside the swimming pool there, a nice conductive corrugated iron fence, no earthing on it, and then our lights within that pool zone again. where they shouldn't be. So even though this work's been done by an electrical contractor, an electrical worker, we can see that there's some issues there that even though we're relying on them to know what's going on, it may not necessarily be, she'll be right, mate, the electrician knows what he's doing. So regular testing and inspections. This is something where we all seem to fall down there. It is a requirement that all our electrical work is tested, both at the initial stage and periodically. So the periodic inspections get a bit vague when we look at the requirement in the wiring rules. Yes, we do have to do them. If we look at the testing standard there, 3019, it basically leaves it very wide, and it'll depend on what our installation is, where it is, the type of work and the environment that it's in. But the important thing is that we do have a schedule there. And like I said earlier, we do have a schedule and we do stick to that schedule, whether it's annually, every 2 years, 6 months, whatever we decide might be the case. Once we set that schedule, we don't have to stick to that. If we find that we're only doing 6 monthly inspections and everything's fine, we can push that out a bit. We can adjust the time frames. That's no worries at all. Inspection and testing needs to be done after repairs or additions. Again, the wiring rules in Section 8 sets out mandatory testing that should be carried out to ensure the equipment or the circuit that's been worked on is safe and it's going to operate correctly when we put it back into service. So the regulations and the Australian standard sets out what testing should be carried out and when it should be done. Probably the big, the big confusion there is the testing of electrical equipment. So the in-service testing and inspection, the Australian standard 3760 there is the standard there, commonly referred to as testing and tagging. And I've certainly been to many sites where we've spoken to the people, the person in control or their representative, and they quite comfortably tell us that we do all our inspection and testing on a regular basis. We get so-and-so test and tagging to come and do it all. Well, that's fine. They do their portable appliances, maybe more than they need to. But as far as the rest of the installation goes, nothing seems to happen there. They might get a contractor in to come and fix a broken light or put a new power point in. Happy days, that's all that gets done. And away they go. So they've got no idea over a period of time if the installation's operating correctly. Are the circuit breakers going to operate correctly? Fault loops correct? Whatever in their arc flashes is, or anything like this. They got no idea at all. Again, the test and tagging. Yes, everyone's got the little book with the records in it or some sort of record there. But as far as the work goes, when a new installation or an addition to an existing installation is done, most of them wouldn't have any idea who's done it, when it was done, or what the results of the tests were. Now, in Queensland, it's not an obligation to provide the test results to a customer. There is an obligation to provide the certificate of test, which is fine, and that's typically the information required there is included into the invoice that goes with the job. Other states, it's different, and again, every state's got a different requirement there. There are specific documents in other states that have to be completed. Some of them do have the test results on there, and some of them have a fairly good description of the work that was done and all the rest of it.
That's
what I've found, again, sorry, Kurt?
That's probably one of the things, Jeff, that kind of gets me as I look at the big picture from asset owner all the way down to the electrician is, as an asset owner, how do I know, even if I see the test results, how do I know as the PCBU that is compliant? You know, and the lack of transparency in the industry that we have today, there's no way for a PCBU to see that.
Correct, and that's what I've found. You know, a lot of people, if they do, they'll insist on getting the test results, and it may as well be written in some foreign language because they have no comprehension of what it's telling them.
Yeah.
You know, if you go to most business managers and tell them, well, this is what our fault loop impedance is, they'll want to know if it comes in a large or small or a regular. You know, they've got no idea. And that's fine. You know, we don't expect everyone to have the technical knowledge of an electrical worker, but it's a bit pointless if we're providing that information and they don't know what it's meaning to them. And like you say, we could write any number down and they wouldn't know if it's showing that it's safe or it's not safe, or it's going to work or it's not going to work. An interesting thing with the recent Amendment 2 of the wiring rules, there's now a recommendation that the test results are documented, and any that require a value should be documented, or the value should be documented as part of those test results, which I think is a good thing. I think it's a good move that we're actually starting to push towards making sure that we do keep those test results. At least there's a possibility that they might be available to the client if they get switched on and start building up that record of what their installation's like. So our regular testing and inspection, like I mentioned earlier, it could include auditing the electrical work that is done, either by an employee or a contractor. So any of the electrical work that is done, we might want to get in the habit of going around to have a look to see that it is the way it should be. Well, as the work's being done, make sure that it's all correct and everything. Again, a bit difficult for some organisations if they don't have the technical knowledge, but pretty much if we see things that don't look right to the layman, there's a pretty good chance that they're definitely not going to be right to the technical people. So again, depending on the level of technical expertise in the organisation, how far we can go with that. But still a recommendation there. So we've talked about being compliant, making sure that our system is compliant, the way we operate is compliant. So looking at the other side of that coin, what could result from our non-compliant electrical installations? Keeping in mind that we might have an installation that's quite a number of years old. There might have been multiple tenants through there. Things might have been changed. Things might have been done by multiple different people, employees, contractors, all that sort of thing. So there's a pretty good chance that the installation is not going to operate correctly. I've certainly been involved with some installations, some of the commercial and industrial workshops throughout the area, and we've identified that some of the installations have probably not been compliant right at the start. If we do fault loop impedance tests, it indicates that the circuit protection is not going to operate as it should do, even though it's been there and it's been there for years. In the event of a fault, if they're not going to operate correctly, it could present a risk to someone getting electric shock or increase the risk of a fire. If a circuit breaker is not going to trip in the time frame, it's not going to clear that fault. If the fault remains, it's increasing your chances of having a fire. Could increase your downtime. Your installations continually having power outages, replacing failed equipment, burn out electric motors and control gear and all that sort of thing. If we've got voltage issues out on long runs, all that sort of stuff comes into it. It just becomes an annoyance. And if we don't regularly check, we're not going to find out these things until such times as things are starting to fail. It all affects the productivity, the viability of the organisation that's there. All those sort of things start coming into it. What we're starting to see more, and I think this might have come out in your insurance, your Zurich webinar earlier on, the insurance costs are going to start going up. If it's identified that your installation is not compliant, you might find if there is an issue that insurance may be unlikely to pay out if it's evident that there are non-compliant issues on the site. Moving on from there, long investigations. Sorry?
That was exactly right. What you said before about our previous webinar with Zurich is that was their major thing globally is they didn't have the transparency to ensure that their assets and their companies they were insuring were electrically compliant, and yet they were paying out all these massive sums of money for electrical damage. And they really are cracking down on that now. And it's not only Zurich, it goes straight across the insurance industry, because they realize that they haven't been doing their own due diligence, ensuring that those electrical installations have a system in place that meets the state and federal standards.
Correct. Yeah, and I've certainly done plenty of inspections on commercial sites at the request of insurance companies. They might be taking on a new policy. They would just want a snapshot of what that installation is like before they make the offer. So certainly something that is growing or becoming more evident that the insurance companies, naturally they like to take your money but not real keen on giving it back in the event of a claim. So they want to make sure they're covering their bases before they agree to it. The other side of that, in non-compliant work, it could lead to long investigations into electrical accidents. Now, any electrical accident, if someone is hurt, it will be investigated. Workplace health and safety or the electrical safety office get involved. It does have an effect on the PCBU, the managers, employees, their well-being, their attitude, the whole lot. Because of the nature of what we're dealing with, it does take quite a long time to get some of those more serious accidents and incidences investigated and dealt with. So that can drag on for months and months and months, and that does have a toll on the people involved. At the end of that investigation process, there's a very good possibility that legal action by the regulators will be taken. That's the idea of all those obligations and duties. At the end of the day, if something's gone wrong, someone will be held accountable. There's been many incidences in the recent years resulted in prosecution action by the regulators, heavy fines, non-compliance, electrical installations and the like. Typical fines up around the $30,000 and $40,000 mark. There's also been jail time issued for serious injuries and the like. So they are getting serious about it. So how can we ensure electrical workers are trained and work safely with electricity? Electrical workers must hold a current licence. There's several different types of licences for electrical work. Again, this is in Queensland. We've got several different licences for different types of electrical work. There's one that covers everything, and then there are basically different types of restrictions from there on down. A good thing that has happened in recent years is the interstate licence are now recognised in each state's mutual recognition. So that covers our electrical work licences. So if I'm trained in Queensland, I can use my licence, I can go over to New Zealand, I can go down to West Australia or over to West Australia, down to Tassie, wherever, and I can still do my electrical work under that electrical work licence. The business licences, unfortunately, aren't, though. We haven't quite made it over that hurdle, so we can't contract. We've got to have state-based contractors' licences. Our businesses should have a documented safe system of work that includes how to work safely with or around electricity. The details of these systems will vary depending on the type of business activity. So if we do employ electrical workers, our business unit must ensure that we've got the safe systems of work for those electrical workers to do their work in a safe manner. It can be difficult if we've got one electrician on staff. Maybe he's a young fellow and hasn't had much to do with safe systems of work or documenting the safe systems of work before. Maybe our safety advisor or the person in charge of the safety for that organisation doesn't have much electrical experience. It makes it difficult to ensure that we're covering all those bases and we're meeting our obligations to make sure our system is there. Naturally, an electrical contractor is going to have more detailed work instructions and procedures than a business manufacturing that are only using electrical equipment, not actually repairing it or doing any electrical work as such. All workers should be trained in order to ensure they understand how to work safely with electricity. And we need to make sure that they actually do follow those safe procedures. Whether it be someone that's using a piece of portable electrical equipment or whether it's someone that's repairing that electrical equipment or installing some electrical equipment, there's got to be safe ways to do it, and we've got to have them documented, and we have to make sure that those people are following those documented procedures. Again, the auditing needs to come in place, and we need to be following those systems. some examples here. Poor installation. The photo on the left, we can see some cables up into the flue there and the pump motor at the top. The way they've been installed, they're hanging basically loose. The machine had quite a bit of vibration about it, and we could see where the cables have been chafing on the edge of the guards and on the edge of the mounts and that sort of thing. Only a matter of time before that chafes through to something live. The motor's going to stop, might get a fault. It might energise some of that steel structure. So the poor installation is going to contribute to an eventual problem there. A photo on the right, an example of some cable damage. The conduit coming out of the ground, it's had protection over it. Obviously, the machine was better than the protection because it's managed to squash it. It's been like that for quite some time. It still works, so there was no problem. We highlight the problem to the PCBU or his representative. Yeah, it's been like that for quite some time. We'll get onto that. The poor maintenance, a control box. The door lock stopped working for some reason. Obviously, someone's been trying to get in there with the wrong tools, managed to break it, so the door's left open. It's not outside in the weather per se, but strong winds and rainy conditions, there could be moisture getting in there. There's certainly a lot of dust from the environment around it got in there. Very dirty, very unkept, very frightening to open the cabinet up. The other photo at the top there, you can't see it because of all the duct tape over it, but there's a limit switch there, which is meant to only operate when the door is closed or open. Obviously too hard for the process, so we've bypassed that with a heap of duct tape. That's fine until something goes wrong. The bottom photo there might be a bit hard to make out, but it's actually a light. And on the top of there that's just highlighted is a build-up of dirt. They couldn't understand, it's a discharge light. They couldn't understand why it was continually failing. It was meant to work for so many hours, but it keeps failing. Until we pointed out that dirt's probably a good 30 or 40 millimetres, maybe more thickness. And it's only stopped because it reached the pivot point where it's just falls off the side. It's not letting the heat dissipate out the fins like it's meant to do, so the thing overheats and melts all the components inside.
Yes, exactly. Classic things you see in the industry.
Yeah, these are the sort of things that, very simple and easy to fix up, but the potential for them to lead to bigger issues, bigger problems down the track are certainly there.
Yeah.
People walk past them every day, all day.
Yeah, exactly. No, there's some amazing information in there, Jeff, and thank you so much. And even I have a ton of different questions. I asked some of them as I went along, but I'm sure people have stacks of questions queued up for Mervyn and ask us. And, I think what we wanted to do today is we wanted to take and make this process as simple as possible. We wanted to take and let you have direct access to Jeff and to his company to help assist you. So the first thing is a link here. So we've actually have a link on our QuickSafety website that'll help you assess to where your building compliance is. Okay, it's just a very simple, I think it's 6 questions max, but if you don't know the answers, it's only a 2-question test. So it's like a 30-second test and that's it. And it will help assess your knowledge on what we've talked about today as well. The second thing is, so I think Mervyn's going to paste that link in there directly in the chat for you to copy and paste and use for yourself. And the second thing is that what we do here at QuickSafety is we offer that transparency. So what you see here at the bottom is actually a Queensland Certificate of Compliance provided by Rickson Electrical. Okay, so what you clearly have here is the actual pass on the left or the fail document on the right. So what we do is we actually have a certified AS 3000 program, and it's fully approved by the electrical regulators. And now there's that complete transparency from any electrician that you use all the way to you, the asset owner, okay, or the PCBU. So both of these documents are available for you to have. You can take and request them. Just send us an email to info, and we will get those out to you as part of attending this this webinar today. So All right, let's get on to the good stuff, and let's find out what questions are out there. We've only got a few minutes left. We'll answer as many questions as we can here. We might answer a couple of questions, and then what I'll do is I'll close the webinar down officially. We will stay on, so if you've asked questions, please stay on, or if you have the time, please stay on. But I'm very conscious of everybody's time, and I want to make sure that if you attend our webinar that we just don't waffle on. If you need to go, you can go, but you've seen the entire webinar. So I will make the official close on time, but we'll try to slip through a couple of questions now. So Mervyn, do you have anything for us?
Yes, yes, Kurt. We actually have a question here from David Sheldon from Brisbane. He's asking for a comment regarding live testing because he says that it's banned on New South Wales mines for the last 4 years. So they're asking, what's your comment on that? And then how do the other states manage this? And is there a live testing? Is live testing actually a part of live work?
Yeah, righto. It's very similar on the Queensland mine sites. They do have restrictions in place as far as live testing goes. So it's not to be done. In the industry, there is provision under the Queensland electrical safety legislation that we can do live testing, because it's acknowledged that at certain times, for certain tasks, we're going to have to be doing some live testing, phase rotations, all that sort of thing. And there are ways that we can do it to ensure we're compliant and to ensure that we're going to be safe, mainly to be safe. And then we've got that documented system there that we're going to follow to ensure that we're going to be compliant and we're going to be safe. Keep it in mind that the PCBU, person that's ultimately got the obligation, typically isn't going to be on site where that work is being done. So they need that system in place that they can pass on to the workers to ensure that they're going to be safe. I hope that answers.
All right. We do have another question here from Byron. He says that we have a program called EWP for regulations for the proper PPE for electrical work. It states that there are no regulations for anything below 50 volts, and there are no stipulations. We have very low voltages, but the amps are not that low, which I never understood. So for example, a 36 volt forklift battery and 400 amps. So he's just stating that out.
I think, Jeff, if I have the correct Byron in place here, I think Byron is viewing in from the US. So that's a US based question, just to help Jeff out there. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's it. And so the regulations from country to country vary so differently, as well as what we see here. I mean, state to state, they're all based against the same standard, but they do vary. So I think that'll help answer the question, Jeff.
Yeah, well, if it's under 50 volts, is correct as far as the legislation goes. It's not covered by an electrical work license. So therefore, not the Electrical Safety Act coming into play there. Again, if we're talking about Queensland, it wouldn't be covered by our Act. I couldn't imagine it'd be too much different anywhere else. The main thing there, we'd have to look at the situation where we've got that 32 volts, what the potential energy behind that, how many amps in the event of a fault, what could be the possible current flow there, and what we were going to do, how we were going to do what we need to do. All those sort of things need to be put together so that we can work out what it is that we're going to do, or what the risks are we're going to deal with, and what we're going to do to mitigate those risks and ensure that we're working safely, reduce the likelihood of us having a problem. Yeah,
nice. Mervyn, I might just hold the questions there. We've only got 1 more minute left on our webinar. So what I'm going to do is, those of you that must leave now, just hang on. I'll get to the actual introduction of next webinar for our series, which is super exciting. But I wanted to formally close this. So we'll circle back around to these questions once I do the close, and then we'll stay on until all the questions are answered. So your question will be answered. Just hang tight with us. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank Jeff, for joining us. Fantastic, informative. I think we've got a bank of questions here, so that'll be excellent to get through those. Really pleased to see independent electrical advisors doing what they do, and please, reach out to Jeff and his team. If your business needs a helping hand ensuring that you're safe, electrically and compliant, please contact Jeff. If your business needs a hand with further understanding of the federal and state requirements, reach out to either one of us. We're more than happy to help you. We work very closely with independent electrical advisors, very well represented and very well thought of in the industry. And as shown today, I mean, it's a bit daunting at first, but once it's explained, it's easy to maintain. So please get a hold of us. We're more than happy to give you any help and assistance as we can. So all we want to do is ensure that your life, property, and reputation is protected. And I want to thank each and every one of you who have signed up and attended today. Thanks for the attendance. It was really well attended. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And hey, I told you I would fill you in about the next webinar topic, which I'm so excited about. If I had a little drum roll, I would do a little drum roll. But we have a special presentation next time on the 27th of August at 1:30, Greg Skyring. Now, he's the Commissioner for Electrical Safety, Queensland. So this is our highest electrical position within the state. And Greg has been appointed by the Governor and Council on the 18th of July, 2016. He's been involved in the industry for over 44 years, and he continually develops strategy and safety for the industry and the community. So Greg will provide an overview of several different topics. Overview of the Electrical Safety Board and committees in Queensland. He's going to discuss specific strategies that they're focusing on. He's going to discuss the Electrical Licensing Committee outcomes and findings, and he'll be here to answer questions. So this is super exciting, and we don't get the opportunity to bend the ear of somebody in his high of position, and we actually do. We have him locked in for the 27th of August at 1:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. So please book that in there. So Mervin's going to actually give you a pre-register link in the chat now, so that you can pre-register for this, because once this is filled up, then we'll have to, not take registration. So make sure and register for this one. It'll be an awesome webinar, like the last three have been. They've all been amazing. So join us next time on QuickSafety's webinars to help assist you stay safe, stay compliant, and stay out of court. Thanks very much for joining. And for those who can stay with us, now let's skip back to the questions and finish those off. So Mervin, what do you have for us?
Yes, yes, Kurt, we have another question from Wade. He is asking, when importing portable electrical equipment or appliances, what is the process to ensure that they are certified, and who can do this inspection in Queensland?
Yeah, good point. We didn't really touch on the importation, but under the electrical safety legislation, importers do have a duty to ensure that their equipment that they're bringing in is compliant. It is all handled through the electrical safety equipment section of the Electrical Safety Office. So I don't send anyone on the wrong path. It's best to contact them and get more details.
Yeah, so
Off the top of my
we
head,
actually
I can't
have
recall exactly what the process is or who does it anymore.
Yeah, we get asked this question through the website. I don't know, it was a period of about 9 months there, and we just got bombarded with this question. So we've actually partnered up with several different engineering firms around the country that are certified to do this. Because like Jeff says, I mean, you have to be certified to do this, and that's all the way from the design to the construction to the manufacturing, and then to the certification of that for the Australian standards. So we do have that information. So if you want to just shoot me an email at info and let me know what you want, I can put you in touch with the right people and kind of short track that process for you a bit.
From my perspective on that topic, you need to keep in mind, if you're the actual person that has arranged to bring that equipment in, if anything is wrong with that equipment, you are held responsible.
Yep.
So we definitely want to make sure that we've got that process underway and all the approvals are in place before that even gets on the ship to come out here.
Yes, most definitely.
All right, we have another question here from Jonathan. He's asking if there is any legislation on the criteria for electrical installations requiring for RPEQ, and what electrical installations require RPEQ, or is this a gray area?
Well, under the engineering qualification side of things, it comes under the building codes, which from memory is only emergency lighting and your fire systems. And there's special qualifications and everything for there. The general electrical side of it is all covered under the Electrical Safety Act requirements. So therefore nothing to do with the registered engineers or the Queensland Engineers Register. Yep. I think, does that help?
Yes, I think that helps. Finally, we have a question here from Jeff. He's asking you specifically, Jeff. Hi, Jeff. In regards to live testing, as per the earlier question, what measures are in place for automation in monitoring and testing, etc.?
Can you just read that again, Mervyn?
Yes. Let me put it in our chat buttons so you can read as well. But let me read it again. Hi, Jeff. In regards to live testing, as per the earlier question, what measures are in place for automation in monitoring and testing, etc.?
So your measures you're going to put in place, depending on the type of automation, typically your automation systems are running at an extra low voltage. So again, the hazards there aren't as great as if we're dealing with over that 50 volts threshold. So it might come down to a site requirement. But again, you know, there's that big a variation in what we do in the electrical industry, and now the automation's just expanding exponentially. How it controls, what it controls, all that sort of thing comes into it. So there's going to be that many variables. There's probably not set measures on exactly how we're going to do that testing with the automation side of things. I would imagine that it's less arduous, because typically we're going to be using a smaller voltage, but we need to be wary if we're in a cabinet and there is low voltage there. So anything over that 50 volts threshold up to 1,000 volts, we need to be mindful of how we're going to reduce the risks of that causing us some sort of problem if it's in the same cabinet.
Mm. And I mean, we've already got systems on the market today that will help you with your regulatory RCD testing. So there are automated systems which help alleviate the direct risk to working live. But the primary guiding thing, like Jeff has already stated, is the state regulations are what restrict you for what you can and cannot do. In our thermography webinar, we talked about, doing thermography through the actual door. So we don't even open up the door of the switchboard, and the capability of inputting windows into switchboards on the door, so that we can actually do this without exposure to live work. So there are things that are out there, but first and foremost, you have to follow the regulations on what is allowed for live work and what isn't. And then also to make sure you have every single thing documented, and that you ensure that your staff or your subcontractors follow that. There was a classic example only a couple of weeks ago with the third-year apprentice and the first-year apprentice doing live work in a switchboard in Victoria. And I think it was Victoria, Jeff, wasn't it? Was that the KFC one, or?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and the third year apprentice, I mean, he's an apprentice, so for a start, he can't be doing live work in the first place. But there was no procedures in place, there was no oversight. They were just doing this work, and you have to make sure that you're following the regulations. And this is where having independent electrical advisors come in and actually tick and flick things for you to actually make sure that you're following what you should be following, because at the end of the day, you are responsible.
And that a good thing I've found is that by coming in from an outside, bringing all my experience, typically we're looking at a site that I'm not familiar with, so I can see it from a slightly different perspective. You know, a lot of times we've looked at things and people go, oh no, that's been like that for quite some time. I remember some years ago standing back at an extremely safe distance while a fella sat on the floor and put his feet against a high voltage switch unit and racked it in by his feet, pushed it in, pushing against the wall, pushed the thing into its cabinet. Well, if that had have shorted out at any stage in that process, he would have knocked his ears off as his ankles went flying past. So people do get complacent with it. And just thinking about the automation question there, probably a big thing to be wary of from the automation perspective, because it runs at those extra low voltages. Technicians are typically going to, well, it's not a danger because it's an extra low voltage, but we need to consider what's also involved there. And if that's energized, the 240 volt control side of it, what's exposed and what's energized there that could be causing us potential problems.
Yeah, exactly. Were there any more questions, Marvin?
Nope. That should take care of all the questions. We do have some frequently asked questions, though, if you want to go.
Yeah, I just said that I thought there were some more that were sent in earlier. So can you just read those out?
Yes. One question is, how can we get help for electrical safety or with its compliance and obligations?
Well, the best thing to do, of course, I'm going to say, we've got the email address and my phone number and everything there. But we're quite happy to travel to sites and have a look and provide whatever assistance is needed to try and reduce the possibility of someone getting hurt or someone put in jail because of something's gone wrong or overlooked. Typically overlooked in the electrical industry is probably the biggest concern. We don't know it's a problem till it's too late. So quite happy to come and provide any assistance that anyone needs with their electrical safety concerns, for sure.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Another question, what could happen if we are not compliant?
Well, depending on the result of what the non-compliance is, anything from a, like I said, on-the-spot fine that can be issued by the regulator through to wearing the guilt of someone being seriously injured or worse, and the potential for legal action from the regulators. Who knows where legal action stops these days? If it's proved that we've been non-compliant or breached our obligations, well, it opens up all sorts of other potential legal avenues that we could be facing. Damage to our equipment, damage to our site, all those sort of things come into it. So there's a whole raft of concerns there that if you're not compliant, always has the potential to cause problems.
All right.
Yeah,
thank you.
And just getting back to the other one, Mervyn, the point about electrical advisors and inspectors such as Jeff. I mean, Jeff covers a huge area here, but we also network with other inspectors from other states. So it doesn't really matter what state or whether you're from New Zealand as well, is that we can actually get you in touch with those people and get that done for you, because our passion is to make sure that you're safe and compliant. And we'll do everything within our networks to make sure that that happens for you correctly and precisely to limit your risk and your exposure.
All right, thank you. Another question is that who would be responsible if there was an incident?
Yeah, well, I think we've covered that with depending on the where the incident is. The person conducting that business or undertaking is pretty much going to be ultimately responsible for for what's going on. And that might drill down as well as that person. There's not necessarily only one person going to be held responsible, but it might come down to electrical supervisors and electrical workers as well.
Yeah, that's what we usually see. Is we see that once there's an electrocution, once there's an instance with electricity, it'll be everybody from the PCBU, which will include the directors of that asset or entity. It'll be the workplace health and safety, the safety officer, safety manager, whoever's in charge of the electrical section of that structure. It will then be the contractor or the subcontractor that actually sent the electrician to that work. And it will then be the specific electrician that did the work on that circuit. And that's why it's so vital to have a complete audit trail of all your work documented, so that you know, as the PCBU, who last worked on that circuit, where were they from, and exactly what date and time did they do that, what tests did they do, and were the tests fully compliant? Because that's really part of your get out of jail free card, so to speak, is having that information available to you. So it's vitally important to do that. I see that the Electrical Safety Commissioner just put in there as well, for people wanting to know more about the scope of electrical equipment and regulatory compliance, Mark. He's actually pasted a web link in there to the government website on that. So thanks very much for that, Greg.
Excellent. That's good.
Let me just put it in on the general chat. All right. So second to the last question that we have is that what should we do if we find something that looks dangerous?
Righto, if we find something that looks dangerous, if it's possible to isolate it, if it's an electrical danger, if there's a risk that someone, or if someone is immediate risk, so if the next person that walks past there is likely to get a shock, we need to either make sure that no one can get access to that, or we can isolate it, turn the power off to it. If we follow the risk assessment process, eliminate it, eliminate that risk of electrical contact is going to be the best result. And that gives us some time. We know that no one's going to be hurt, and gives us some time to deal with it and get someone in with the skills and the knowledge and to rectify the problem altogether. If isolation is not an option straight away, we need to make sure we've got some secure barricading around it so we can prevent someone from getting access to those live parts and potentially becoming a victim. Naturally, it's got to be addressed in an urgent manner. So straight away, someone needs to get there with the skills and ability to make it safe. It can't be just ignored and forgotten about and, oh, she'll be right. We can't just leave it be.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. And finally, we have the last question here. What should we do if someone gets an electric shock?
An electric shock. Any electric shock, anyone that receives an electric shock should go off to a medical facility and get on the ECG and get their heart rhythm checked. There's been multiple cases where people have received the shock during the day for whatever reason. They've received the shock, they feel fine, they keep going. At the end of the day, they get home, they slow down, they relax, or even at night when they go to bed, their heart's been out of rhythm all day, it slows down sufficiently, eventually it goes into fibrillation and they don't wake up in the morning. So the advice that's always given is if anyone receives an electric shock, they should be straight to a medical facility and get put on the ECG, right? Check the heart rhythm. If we've got the ambulance there, if it's a more serious situation or they've gone off to the doctors or in the workplace, we need to report it. So it goes through to the regulators. That gets investigated. As a shortening of that, we can notify the supply authorities, likes of Ergon and Energex and the like, and they can send someone out. Typically, they've got people on the ground authorised. They can come and investigate the situation. Importantly, if we do have an electrical incident in the workplace, as much as possible, we shouldn't disturb the scene. Right? We've got to secure that scene and make sure it can be investigated. Of course, there's going to have to be some sort of action there to get the casualty out, to get the victim out and get them medical attention. But as much as possible, we want to make sure that everything's kept as is when it happened so it can be investigated and identified what's gone wrong to cause that problem. The main intention of an investigation is to try and identify where we've gone wrong so improvements can be made. Right? So even in a workplace, even if it's a minor electric shock, someone's just received a little tingle, we still need to investigate that so we can identify where it's gone wrong and make sure that we take precautions to stop it happening again. The next one might not be so lucky, so we want to prevent it from happening. So important that we get that the scene secured if we do have an incident, and the investigation is done as quick as possible.
Yeah.
All right, that should be all of the questions, Kirk and Jeff.
That's it. Okay, I was just
All right.
scrolling through where everybody was from, and so we've got everybody from mining industry to regulators to councils to contractors. We've got just the asset owners. We've got a whole bunch of ones here, all the way from Queensland to WA to Victoria to Tasmania. So thanks very much for joining us from Tasmania. And I always love Tassie. It's probably one of my favorite places around. Yeah, thanks very much, everybody, for joining us. Just a final reminder, just pre-register on Zoom for that next webinar. It's going to be an absolute ripper. I'm so excited and can't wait for it. I'll be like a kid at Christmas. And it'd be great to just sit down with Greg and just to ask questions that we do. And we'll keep him for as long as we can. He's a very, very busy man. We're super pleased to be able to have him for the time we've got him. But come armed with your questions. Be respectful of his time. We certainly will. Join us on this next webinar. It'll help assist you to stay safe, stay compliant, stay out of court, and stay informed. Because information is where the power is. And sorry for the pun for that as well. But it's, if you have the information, you will be safer. And that's really our heart and soul of what we want to do. Is we want to give you this information so that you, your workmates, your family, your colleagues, your assets are safer. So once again, thanks very much, Jeff, for joining us. It's been a privilege to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And so we will catch everybody next time on the QuickSafety webinars. Thank you so much.